$4 billion. That's a lot of dough. Hey guys, welcome to 5 Steps to Winning Big in Small Business Federal Contracts. You want to talk about what that $400 billion represents? Well, 92 billion of that goes to small businesses every year. 92 billion or more, sometimes a little bit less, but 92 billion of the 400 billion. But guess what? 308 billion or a little bit more or a little bit less goes to big business. This is where all of the money is spent in federal contracting. So welcome to video 3. What I've had to do is break it down in 2 parts just to keep it simple, because sometimes we can have an overload of information. It's still 5 steps, but I want you to get clarity on the things that I'm trying to teach you. So this is video 3, part 1, how to win big with small business federal set-asides. It's easier than you think. So let's look at how these set-aside contracts work. I talked about the 308 billion. This represents a total of the 400 billion. Sometimes it's a little bit more. For instance, in the slides before, or I should say the video before, I talked to you about the 438 billion that was spent in 2017. And I say in 2017, even though this is still 2017, because I mentioned this in the previous video. This is a new fiscal year. Every October 1st, the year begins for the federal government. So in 2017, there was about $438 billion spent total. But on average, you will hear people talk about a $400 billion budget. That's what the government spends with businesses. The government is not in business to do business like we are. They just do what they need to do to keep things organized, keep the country moving, and they hire businesses and contract with businesses like you to get things done. So 92 billion, a little bit less, a little bit more, take or leave some. Like in 2017 for small businesses, it was a total of $90.1 billion that was spent. And that represents 23% of what has to be shared with small businesses. So if you're a small business, you need to be getting a piece of that pie. And then if you look at how big the pie is for big business, I mean, that's an awful lot of money. But the truth of the matter is, small businesses barely go after the 23%. So I'm not going to complain or make a big deal about it, but you guys, you have to go and get this money. And there are only a handful of small businesses that are doing this, but you could be one of them. So I just told you this. I just want you to remember that number, $400 billion being spent every single year on every single type of product or service that you can imagine. From toilet tissue to recycling to office supplies to uniforms, anything you can think of. And there is a code under NAICS codes. There's a code in the system for each one of those products and services. All you got to do is follow these basic steps, stay focused. First of all, you got to make the decision that you want to do it. You have to make the commitment. You take those steps and you go get it. So this is how it works. So the federal agency is required to, by law, set aside 23% of all federal contracting dollars for small businesses. And this is how it's broken down. As you can see, where it says total SBs, that represents total small businesses. And you need to remember that because you will see that again. Total small businesses, 23% is broken down this way. So 7% of the 23% goes to regular small businesses. Remember in the videos early on I talked about you don't have to be certified, you just have to be a small business. That's the 7%. If you look to the right, the other light blue or a little lighter blue, 5% for WOSBs. That would be women-owned small businesses. Not just women-owned businesses, but women-owned small businesses. That is a certification program. Remember I said I'll probably do some videos on that because there's not a lot of clarity out there about what certifications are and how they work, and how many different certifications there are, but I'm talking to you about most of them right now. So the 5% would be for women-owned small businesses. You see this SDV, that would be 3% for service-disabled veterans. Now, regular veterans can get that too, but we have a special market for service-disabled veterans, but you can get a veteran certification as well. But a service-disabled veteran, that's another level of certification, and that's 3%. You would think it would be a little bit more, but it's 3%. And then this gray area right here is small disadvantaged businesses, and then also 8A. If you have an 8A certification and you understand what that is, or if you don't have one but you understand what that is, you know that that is the only real true minority program that they have. All of these other programs are not minority programs. The 8A program is the only program that truly identifies minorities and tries to give them some type of business development to help them grow their businesses. It's called the 8A program. It's a very famous program. It's been around for a long time. And then they are actually grouped together with disadvantaged businesses, period. So 8A is considered part of the disadvantaged group, and that group is combined together for 5%. And then you have the yellow, which is 3% hub zone. Hub zones are certifications where businesses, any type of small business, can become hub zone certified. It just means that they're in a specific area, usually an economic development area, an area that has a focus for growth, where the government wants the company to provide jobs to low income areas, but you have to stay in that area and build your company in that area in order to take advantage. But if you look at all of these different pieces, the way they're broken down, each of these pieces that are broken down have contracts set aside for them specifically. So even though we're talking about 23%, this is how it's broken down. And the largest portion is the 7% that goes to all small businesses. Now, if you are a WSB, or if you are an 8A, or if you're a hub zone, or even just a regular disadvantaged business or a veteran-owned business, you can still take advantage of set-asides for small businesses, which would be part of that 7%. So if you have a certification, you're actually in a great position because you could be certified as a disabled veteran and go after contracts set aside for disabled veterans, but you could also go after contracts set aside for small businesses. And I will show you what that looks like, because in video 4 and 5, we look at what it's going to take for you to evaluate some of those opportunities that are set aside. What does it really mean to set aside? I'm going to break it down for you. So set-aside contracts means that federal buyers, contracting officers, can take contracts and literally set them aside for those groups that I just talked to you about. Each of those set-aside situations, like each of those types of certifications or set-asides, there are regulations that support those set-asides. So the federal buyers are not just taking that off the top of their head. They're doing this because it's the law. They must do it. So when contracts are set aside, only that group can bid on the contracts that are set aside. So if it's for women-owned small business, WOSBs, or EDWOSBs, then those are the only businesses that can bid on that opportunity. But if it's total small business, all types of small businesses can bid on that, whether they're woman-owned, veteran-owned, it doesn't matter. So This is huge because it limits the competition for you. You don't need to worry about those big businesses that I just showed you in the blue, the businesses that get 77% of the federal contracting dollars. You don't need to worry about that because they're separating you. And that is called full and open competition. When there are no set-asides, the term is full and open competition. So if you're smart, you'll focus strictly on the total small business set-asides and the certified small business set-asides. Why would you want to compete with the larger companies? If you need to compete with the larger companies because you never see any set-asides, I'm going to tell you what you have in the bag where you could actually get some help for yourself to get an opportunity set aside. Because sometimes there are situations in industries where you see no set asides, but that's because, and I'll talk to you about this in the next video in part two of this video. And it's going to be two, but it's video 3. So I'll talk to you about that because that's a big problem. We're not bidding. So that's why sometimes you'll see things as full and open competition. And then you could literally bid on a contract that has been set aside and also have very little competition. I know some people find that hard to believe, but I hate to spoil the element of surprise, but it's true. You could literally have maybe 2 or 3, maybe 5, maybe 10 sometimes people competing against you. But because you're a small business, I'll tell you what, it won't be the way it is in the large full and open competition arena. They have to compete with 90, sometimes 100 people, maybe a little bit more, but you don't have to do that. Set-asides are not optional for federal buyers. They must set aside to meet their agency goals, and I'm going to talk to you about that. So the new Small Business Jobs Act is not new anymore. It's been around for 4 years. Our previous president actually did something to implement this and help small businesses. But before a contracting officer can consider giving something or setting aside something for full and open competition or allowing larger businesses to compete, they must consider you. They must consider you as a small business or as a certified business. They're supposed to conduct market research. And remember, I talked to you about that. Sure, they can go in SAM and pull some information up about you and view your profile, but they have another area. I spoke to you about that in a previous video where I talked about small business dynamic search. That's where they go to look for your information, and it's only small businesses in there. Now keep in mind, small businesses can be from $0 all the way up to $36.5 million. So you still do have some competition, but even with that, I can tell you for a fact, it's still not that intimidating. I mean, if you are a company that barely makes $1 million a year or even $500,000 a year, no, you don't want to have to compete with a $5 million or even a $10 million company, especially a $36 million company. But I'm going to tell you, you still have a better chance because there's so many small businesses that do not pay attention to this. They don't have the focus and they don't take the time to make this happen. And so if you're a $500,000 business, you may compete with a few. It depends. But there are also some set-asides that can be for very small businesses. I don't consider a business making $500,000 a year a very small business, but it would be compared to a $5 million business. It's all relative, but the point is that it's definitely doable. So these contracting officers, what I call federal buyers, they must do market research. Do they do it all the time? Absolutely not. I told you I'll always be honest with you about these things, but it's what they're supposed to do. And this is where sometimes marketing can come in, meaning you letting them know that you're out there. But there are other ways that they have of doing market research as well. One of the other ways that they have of doing market research would be a sources sought. And I will show you where sources sought are put out on fbo.gov. That's where you find a lot of your bids. So we'll get to that, but I just want to let you know they are supposed to be out there looking for you. 23% of all federal contracting dollars must go to small businesses. So the contracting officer can consider the historical data, the anticipated award amount, and all of that based on what they see when they're doing their market research. They're supposed to do their homework too. I'm going to do some videos about contracting officers and federal buyers because I want you to understand what their world is like. I have to tell you what the regulation says, but I also need to tell you the truth about what happens. Again, it's, something as simple as, yes, they're supposed to do market research, but do they do it all the time? No. Could they do it more? Absolutely. It would help small businesses a lot more. But I'm going to talk to you about how that's controlled and the support that you do have in the second part of this video. So they're supposed to be doing their homework just like you're supposed to be doing your homework, and they need you. So another part to that would be in the previous administration, because we had the recovery where we were trying to get back up on our feet as a country, we had that $750 billion that needed to be put back in the economy. I don't know if some of you remember that, but that's what happened. The president back then and that administration had to get the economy moving again because of the war. And so they had $750 billion that they need to put in the system. So what they came up with is the new Small Business Jobs Act. And what that meant was we've got to find a way to help small businesses get more of this money. And even though this is not the conversation today, small businesses really do generate and create more than 85% of the jobs in this country. And I'm not talking $15 million companies as much as I'm talking maybe growing companies that are at $1 million and they're growing. Maybe the next year they're going to get to 2 million or 3 million because they just got a big contract. Those are the job creators. When you hear these politicians talking about money trickling down with the larger businesses, it doesn't work that way. Small businesses are the only ones that are creating the jobs. Sure, big companies hire, but not like small business. Small businesses make this country go round and round. And the president at that time, just like other administrations, they understand that. So if there is some contract spending between $3,000 and $150,000, it is automatically reserved for small business. So that means you guys get that. A contracting officer, a federal buyer can't even allow a bigger business to bid on that unless they absolutely cannot find any small businesses. If the acquisition or supplies or services or products are between $150,000 and $300,000, they must be first solicited to small businesses, certified small businesses, no matter what type of certification. Small businesses get the first opportunity to bid. The SBA regulations give the contracting officer discretionary authority to utilize any certification they want to utilize. So if you have an area or you see something where you have never seen set-asides and you know that you can do that work, or you know there are other small businesses out there like yourself, you could communicate with a small business contracting officer or a specialist, and I'll talk to you about what a specialist is. You could communicate with someone in that federal agency to talk to them about the option of setting an opportunity aside. But generally speaking, by law, this happened 8 years ago, by law, a contracting officer cannot spend $3,000 to $150,000. That's one segment, and then $150,001 all the way up to $300,000. That must be set aside. Both of those dollar groups must be set aside for small businesses. It doesn't matter what type of small business. And then based on market research, they can go ahead once again and use whichever program they want to satisfy the goals for their agency. And I'll talk to you about what agency goals are and why everybody's going to do what they have to do. But it's important for you to know the laws and the regulations and know what small businesses are entitled to, because the more you know, that's what education does. It makes you better. It motivates you and it helps you to understand how to get what you want. So the contracting rules are procurements between 3,000 and 150,000. The first group will be small businesses. You can see number one, the first group will be small businesses, which will include HubZone, 8A, all of the certified businesses. So if a contracting officer has a contract where they need a service or a product or anything that the federal government needs to purchase, if it's between 3,000 and 150,000, they must go with small businesses first. They can only go to full and open competition, which would be the large $308 billion business market. They can only go to the big companies if they cannot get a small business that can service or provide the service or provide the products. If the contracting opportunity is between 150,000 and 1 penny, it between 100 and between 300,000, they must go to the next level, which would be certified businesses first, which would be small businesses second, total small businesses second, and full and open competition third. So anything between $150,000 and 1 penny, all the way up to $300,000, must first go out to bid to the first group, which would be all the certified businesses. And if the certified businesses are not responding, then they go to the second group, which would be total small businesses. And if no one under the small business category, period, in one or two responds, then they can go to a third category. Now you might say, how do they know that that's going to happen? They know because, again, I just told you a few slides ago that they have to do market research. They do market research. If they don't know, if they don't have a history that's already developed, then they do some market research to find out if there are at least a couple of small businesses that can provide the service. If they find that there are no small businesses, certified or uncertified, that cannot provide the service, then they move to make the opportunity a full and open competition to larger businesses. And that is why it is so important for us to bid as small businesses and be out there looking for the opportunities. And you don't have to look that hard. In this part in video 3, I'm going to show you exactly what you will see when you start looking out there, what the set-asides look like. So 23% of all of the contracting dollars are going to come from the total agency pool. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So yes, it's 23% as a whole, but every single agency has their goals that they have to meet, and all of those goals together amount to the 23%. So you have agencies like, I'm giving you examples, the Department of Interior. They're going to do their portion of women-owned contracts, their portion of 8A, their portion of veterans, their portion of service disabled, their portion of HubZone. They contribute. The Department of Agriculture will do the same thing. So will the Department of Defense. So will the Department of Justice. So will the Homeland Security, and so will the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, these are just to name a few. We have hundreds and hundreds of federal agencies that have a spending budget for contracts, buying goods and services. So you could literally be doing business with any one of these agencies. And I just want to point out that when you see these agencies, when I teach you how to find the federal buyers, you need to keep in mind that each of these agencies have little baby departments underneath them. And I call them Big Daddy agencies and then the babies underneath them. So let me give you an example. So the Department of Justice is a Big Daddy agency. The FBI is a little baby agency under the Department of Justice. So is the Bureau of Prisons. That's under the Department of Justice. You have all different types of agencies under the Department of Justice. And the reason that's important is because you need to know which agency you're dealing with. You need to know which agency you're getting the contract from. These federal officers and agencies, they get very offended when they think you haven't done your homework. So once you run your reports, and you decide which buyers you're going to work with, which agencies you want to go after, that's when you're going to do your research. But we'll get into that. But when I get to certain places where I need to show you certain things, I'm going to mention it at that time. So these are just some of the agencies, but we have hundreds and hundreds of agencies, and you need to pay attention to detail. You need to know, and remember what I said in the beginning, you need to act like you know, because they're going to look to see if you know. You need to have the confidence and the education. And sometimes you'll find out that you have more education than some of them do, believe it or not. So federal agency goals, every agency has goals for each one of those certifications that we talked about. They have goals for small business, and they have goals for each one of the certified categories and disadvantaged businesses. So you have goals for women, goals for 8A, goals for veterans, so on and so forth. Goals for HubZone. Every agency has that. And then each agency is required to report their results every year. And guess who monitors that? That would be the SBA. So the SBA watches to make sure. The SBA, the Small Business Administration, was put there specifically to help small businesses like us, like you guys, to make sure that the large companies are not eating up all of the federal contracts and that you guys are being treated fairly. Now, do they always do a good job at it? No, but that's their job. And sometimes you need to remind them of what their jobs are. The SBA, along with other representatives, are required to work with these federal agencies to ensure that the agencies meet their goals. The contracting officers, the federal buyers, they're responsible for making these things happen, but there are monitors in place and, people watching to make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing for small business. And then every agency with a contracting budget has a specialist, a small business specialist that works for you. They sometimes forget that they work for you, but they do. If it was not for small businesses, they would not be there. So when you go to an agency, you're doing your homework, one of the people you want to know is a small business specialist. Sometimes you have to know who to go to for what. There's some things you don't want to ask the contracting officer, some things you want to talk to the small business specialist about because that's his or her job, and you want to save your moments with the contracting officer because his time, not that your time is not valuable, yours is too. So you don't want to make the contracting officer feel like you're asking stupid questions, but you even though no question is stupid, you just want to make sure that you're spending the right time with the right people. So you leave the contracting questions specifically for the contracting officer. You ask all the other questions to the small business specialist. Maybe if you don't understand how the agency works, maybe you have some questions about the agency after your research. Those are the types of questions you would ask the small business specialist. You keep your conversation with the contracting officer as sacred because they don't usually answer their telephone or answer emails unless you're talking to them about a contract, and then they want to talk to you. So you want to make sure you know where to go so that you don't waste your time and you don't burn bridges before you even get there. And by the way, you may be new to the process, but they don't care. It's not their problem. So it's important that you do as much of your homework as you can, like you're doing with me right now. That way you don't feel uncomfortable. You know what makes sense to ask the contracting officer. You know what makes sense to ask the specialist. And by the way, there are a couple of other people I'm going to introduce you to that are also there to work with you. They wouldn't have a job if it were not for you. So the NAICS code, we all know what that is because we just talked about that in the previous videos and how this code is very important. The NAICS code is assigned under small business programs. So for instance, 8A, the NAICS code is really important. I mean, for you, if you're just a regular small business and you're not under a certification program, you don't have to worry about whether or not your NAICS code fits into a specific certification. WOSBs can only use certain certifications, certain codes for their certifications, I should say. So it doesn't mean they can't use small business NAICS codes, regular ones. It just means that if they want to take advantage of being a small business, a total small business, plus a WOSB, they have to have both codes in there. So a WOSB could have all kinds of code, a set of codes for WOSBs and a set of codes for regular total small business. And the contracting officer also must have an expectation that there are more than one small businesses out there that will submit offers if he's going to set aside something. They don't want to set aside something and then nobody comes to bid. So again, this is where we have to do our part. When we see opportunities, if we're serious about getting our 92 billion, then we need to be out there getting our 92 billion. They're not going to set it aside if they don't see us. And even though it's a law and a regulation, they have to spend that money. They have to spend that money, and that's something else I think people forget. They're going to spend it somewhere. Why not with you? The CO, the contracting officer, the federal buyer, can set aside a contract if they want to with only one offer. They do it all the time. I see it all the time. So, and they do that sometimes because maybe they have a history or they did some research. Maybe two or more did not bid, maybe only one bid. But they could check around, they could do some investigation, but they can still award that contract to that one bidder. And I've seen it happen, especially for $30 and $40 and $50,000 contracts. So just keep your eye open and don't be discouraged. Don't worry about your competition. Worry about yourself, because sometimes you could be your own competition. Then the anticipated award price, they can actually award contracts to small businesses, certified and uncertified, as large as $4 million per contract. So you could have two of those. You could have five of those. But it could be up to $4 million as a set aside for regular products or services. For manufacturing, it would be more like $6 million. So just imagine working your way up to that if that's where you want to be. If you don't want to go up to $4 million contracts, you don't have to. There are plenty of contracts between $3,000 or less and $6 million contracts. So it's up to you. You decide. And then the offer that's submitted by a small business must be fair and reasonable. Now, there are some regulations that allows contracting officers to work with you a little bit on the pricing, because most of the time small business owners cannot compete with the larger companies. Larger companies can give discounts. They can practically give something away. And again, this is why you shouldn't be competing with a large business. But some of your small business peers are large too. Because really, a $15 million company, even though the government says they're a small business, that's no small business to most of us. I mean, that's a nice sized company, and we all know it, but that's the way it is. I don't know why they make the small business group so large, but it is. Again, small businesses can be from $0 all the way up to $36.5 million, but it is not an unreasonable situation when it comes to bidding. I just want you to know that. I think often even your regular average person doesn't realize a $30 million company, depending on the industry that they're in, can be considered a small business still in the federal contracting arena. So, and primarily if you're talking 30 million, you're probably talking construction. Those are usually the bigger dollars, or a manufacturing company. So a manufacturing company, for instance, that has 500 or less employees, that company could still be considered a small business. It's all based on your NAICS code. So now, guess what this is? This is an actual FBO.gov search. And I did this search based on set-asides, not women-owned business or veterans, and we'll get to that later. But this is what it looks like. If you look over here to the right in the middle, I always look at pre-solicitations, and I'm going to train you on that. But pre-solicitations are bids that are coming out, and you see total small business. There are right now, as of few days ago, 419 small business set-asides out there nationwide. And you would be surprised, there are still not enough small businesses bidding on these contracts, even though there are 419 out there. So, and pre-solicitations, I love pre-solicitations because most people don't look at them. I do, because it's my job to know, and I know all about them. A lot of people think that these contracts get on here last minute, which a lot of times they do. But if you do what I teach you to do, you will know when the bids are going to come out before they actually come out. Okay, but this is what it looks like, and this is where we're going to go in video 4 and 5 when we're looking around. But this is FBO.gov. This is one of the places where you will come. Some of you may be familiar already, where you're going to come and look at the last bidding opportunities that are put out there within the last 30 days. Every agency actually has a negotiated agreement with SBA so that they can reach their goals. Now, you have, let's just take the Department of Defense. That includes the Air Force, the Navy. Okay, so you're talking about a lot of different agencies. Not all of them may have it exactly the same way with the baby agencies like Air Force, Army, Defense Logistics, and all of that. However, the Department of Defense has to make sure that everybody in their arena, all of their baby agencies or baby departments, they have to make sure that all of their departments do their part so that the Department of Defense can reach their goals. So they work with all of their baby agencies underneath them so that they can reach their goals. It would be the same with the Department of Justice. When we look at the Department of Justice, are they meeting their goals? We would look at the Department of Justice as a whole, but the Department of Justice has to manage FBI, the Bureau of Prisons. They have to manage all of their baby agencies to ensure that their baby agencies are doing what they're supposed to be doing to meet or help meet the 23%. So contracting officers are charged with meeting those goals for their agencies. A lot of pressure is put on them. They have to understand the certification programs. They have to know when is a good time to set aside. That's why you have to be educated, because you may have to speak up one day and ask a contracting officer and a small business specialist, why are there no set-asides in your industry, and will there be? And you may have to send them some marketing information about your company just to let them know that you're out there. And so they're not perfect, they're human. And the reason I want to do a short little video about contracting officers and federal buyers is because I want you to understand their thinking. They don't think like you, and they don't think like me. They're not business people. They work for the government. So in their minds, this is a job, and all they think about is meeting their goals. And I'm not talking about meeting small business goals. I'm talking about spending money, making sure that all of the other agencies, the users, are getting what they need. So these guys, all they do all day long is think about how do I spend this money? I know that sounds like a lot of fun, but it's not in this case. It would be fun to you when you win the bids, you win the contracts, but to them, there is a lot of pressure. And then you put in that mix that they have to give small businesses a chance on top of that. That's a tall charge, and a lot of them are not as educated as you may be about certified small businesses. So you need to know your stuff so you can make sure they're doing their stuff. The Small Business Program authorizes contracting officers to restrict competition solely among small business companies to meet their goals. So if they didn't have the ability or the regulations or the laws to support them, they wouldn't be able to meet these goals. Those set-aside agreements are specifically for them to keep the level playing field, and that's for you to keep everything fair. And as you can see, 23% compared to 77% is not all that fair. However, we're not even, when I say we, I'm talking you, small businesses, you guys are not even getting, barely getting the $92 billion you're supposed to be getting, or barely getting the 23%. So how can I complain? The more we do, the better we'll get. But the thing is sometimes we don't even eat up all the $92 billion. And that means that some dollars are left on the table. And do they sometimes not meet their goals? Absolutely. We have problems with women right now, meaning women-owned businesses, women-owned small businesses specifically, are not getting their goals met. So you have a lot of agencies that need to give more business to women, but guess what? Women are not doing their part either. Women are not bidding. These women-owned companies, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of women certified, and they don't go and bid on the contracts. A lot of it is because they don't know what to do, don't know where to start, and that's why this is so much fun for me, because I can help people figure this out. And the more we reach out, the more women business owners learn, the more they'll get. But you don't get if you don't ask. The biggest part is showing up, and women are not showing up. So that's part of my initiative, is to get all small businesses to show up, but especially the ones that appear to be lagging behind, and that would be women, which is very surprising, by the way, because women just got their own certification that they fought for 8 years ago, and I shouldn't say 8 years ago, it was more like 2011. So, but it's a long time. It's long enough. Contracting officers also have the authority to assign set-aside opportunities at any time based on certified or uncertified small business programs. So they have a lot of authority, but they still have to meet these goals. They're still being watched, and there's still enforcement in place. And by the way, one of the things I do want to mention that may be on here is contracting officers can also do what they call a sole source contract for a business. That means that they can't find anyone else to do a specific program or service, and they found one business that could do it. So they can do a justification to say, we could not find any other businesses to do this, so this is going to be a sole source contract, which could also be up to $4 million, but it could also be renewable every year or every other year, because remember, it's a sole source contract. They can't find anybody else to do it. And those are wonderful things. People are always looking for them, but people have to understand a sole source contract is based on the fact that the contracting officer cannot find another business to do it. That's why it's a sole source. So that means that probably whoever gets that opportunity will have it for a little while. Contracting officers are authorized by regulation to locate and seek opportunities. I talked about the marketing, remember? The marketing research. And did I tell you also that they don't do a great job at it all the time? But sometimes they do. Sometimes they get in a desperate situation where they need a woman-owned business, a veteran-owned business, a hub zone-owned business. They need something like that, and they sure do go out to the market research area, which would be the small business dynamic search, they find the time to do it then because somebody taps them on their shoulders and says, we are short on our women goals. You better find a woman. And lo and behold, what do? They go and find a woman-owned business to take care of and to bid on that opportunity. Or they find a couple, put the opportunity out there. Sometimes you could get a call where maybe they didn't have time to do that. They found maybe one or two. They called a couple, asked you to send them some pricing, and you don't even have to go through the full process. So our next slide is just a picture of a goal chart. It's a couple years old, but they still look like this. They haven't changed. But it's a goal chart for the Department of Defense. And all 100 plus of these agencies that I'm talking to you about, they all have a goal chart for the prime contracting goals, which would be the uncertified small businesses in total, that total 7%. And then also women-owned business, veteran, 8As, they have a goal for each one of those business groups, and they have to meet those goals. And a lot of times they're not meeting them. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Sometimes for different agencies they look a little bit smaller, but the point is every agency, remember I said this, every agency has contracted and negotiated their goals with the SBA, and they give their portion of the 23%. And then they also have to show subcontracting goals. And I'll talk to you down the line about how subcontracting goals are also put into place. Okay, and with that said, thank you for watching. This is video 3, part 1. See you in the next video. And guys, please don't forget to start leaving me comments. Tell me what you need. Ask me questions. And don't forget to list your business on fedbizexchange.com. That's all for now. See you in the next video.